Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be concentrating on Act 1 Scene 3 of the play Othello, concentrating on the meanings, messages and methods used by Shakespeare in this particular scene. So, Othello is on trial in this scene, as is his love for Desdemona. The personal love affair that he has and his public office are blurred into a scandal before the Senate. Brabantio shares with the court his beliefs that Desdemona has been abused with witchcraft and magic. The Duke understands Brabantio's anxieties but pleads with him to forgive his daughter Desdemona. By the end of this scene, Brabantio disowns his daughter. Othello is informed that he is needed to prepare for battle against the Turks in Cyprus and that he must leave immediately. Desdemona asks permission and pleads with the Duke to join Othello in Cyprus. Her wish is granted, and Iago's wife is to be her maid. Brabantio mentions his doubts about Desdemona's trustworthiness in light of what he sees as absolute betrayal by her. And Iago pledges to support Roderigo in his blind hope to get Desdemona and humiliates Othello through cuckolding him. So how would you stage this scene? You could focus on the back and forth of different characters sharing their views and exposing their beliefs. It's really a decision for me about whether I would choose to stage Othello as genuinely modest. For example, Bradley in 1904 believed Othello was the most romantic figure among Shakespeare's heroes. If you believe that, you would surely stage it differently to, well, believing that maybe Othello is self-dramatising, as asserted by T.S. Eliot in 1927. Think about how you would stage it, especially in his massive monologues, actually, where he's narrating his life before he joined the army and travelled and his exoticism. It has a huge bearing on how we allow the drama to unfold. So the drama for this scene unfolds with business in the Duke and the other senators are discussing the issues of the Turkish fleet that are preying upon Cyprus. All the other characters that we met in Act 1 Scene 2 then emerge on the stage at the same time. And to some extent, Brabantio is critiqued for not joining the Senate earlier, considering he is a member of the Senate. Brabantio shares his deep-rooted concerns at Othello to the Senate, and he understands Othello is needed on state business. In fact, everyone on stage says, "We are sorry for it" at the same time. And we have to question, is this simply for comic relief? Is Shakespeare doing this actually to heighten that Othello will not be punished? Or is it just a bit of humour in a pretty dark, menacing scene? This is the scene where Othello shares his life story and explains how he won Desdemona. He asks for Desdemona to explain how they fell in love, and he stakes his life on her word. It amplifies him as a man of integrity, and it shows a trust in Desdemona. Brabantio describes Desdemona as passive and meek, yet when we meet her in this scene, she defends her love for Othello very vocally. She, if anything, is the commander of their love. And so we have to question, how would a Shakespearean audience respond to this? Would they question a woman with power? Is it already sealing her fate of doom? The Duke does allow Desdemona to join Othello in Cyprus, and he tries to appease Brabantio, though this is all in vain. Brabantio perpetuates a very harsh opinion of how his daughter should not be trusted upon the betrayal he's faced, when he states, "Look to her more if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived her father and may thee." The rhyme of C and V amplifies the rage, and this is the line that haunts the rest of this tragedy. If it's about jealousy, it's as if Othello really hears this and it begins to resonate with what we learn later. The scene ends with Iago fooling Roderigo again into believing he can get Desdemona, and we definitely believe this is not possible. Though it's important that the act ends with Iago's soliloquy, once more signalling his Machiavellian power. He establishes his attack on Othello whilst he shares his thoughts with the audience. It seems ironic that he chooses to create suspicion about Desdemona with Cassio, considering Iago believes Othello has done his office with Emilia, his wife. So what does Shakespeare use in terms of language to accentuate the key focus of this scene, which to us should probably be Othello's defence? When he says, "Rude I am in my speech and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace," we have to question if he's really being modest, or if he's heightening his otherness and his eloquence. It seems pretty eloquent to me. He also says what drugs, what charms, what conjuration and what mighty magic I won his daughter. So whilst he dismisses accusations of witchcraft, we have to question, is Desdemona simply a prize to him? He's so confident too that Desdemona will back him up. When he says, "Not only take away, but let your sentence even fall upon my life." That is a man who trusts in his integrity of the woman he has chosen to be his wife. It's important also to note the semantic field of exoticism that is referenced when he's sharing his life story. He references the flood and field, the desert's idol, cannibals, and the anthropophagi. Sorry, I always say it wrong. And we have to question, is this really just to evoke fear and fascination from us as the audience, whether that's at court or us viewing it, or once more to draw attention, amplify his otherness in a really dramatic way? Probably one of the most famous quotes in this whole play is, "She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them." But pity doesn't seem like a great foundation for marriage, if you ask me. Does Shakespeare craft this to highlight the naivety at the heart of their marriage, or to show that the isolation Othello has already begun to feel will get worse as this play unfolds? And let's take this next and final quote. "Come, Desdemona, I have but an hour of love, of worldly matters and direction to spend with thee. We must obey the time." Those final words hint at the physical priorities and passion of their marriage as newlyweds. It doesn't sound like their foundation for marriage, whether it's pity or the thrill of loving someone for the dangers they've passed, is necessarily the right basis for where things should go in terms of a long-standing commitment for life. Shakespeare's so powerful here also in depicting Brabantio's fury. He says, "She's abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells and medicines bought of mountebanks." So simultaneously, she is assumed as passive and weak, as perhaps a Jacobean society might have expected a woman to be. But additionally, he's repeating the same message from Act 1, Scene 2. He's not relenting. And I love this, actually. I feel like Shakespeare presents Brabantio as fixated on an issue. Or is he simply stunned and taken aback and dumbfounded by what he's learning? Brabantio also describes Desdemona as a maiden never bold, a spirit so still and quiet that her motion blushed at herself. This seems almost comic if we believe that Desdemona is actually quite sneaky for keeping the secret for so long. But we learn as Desdemona arrives, obviously, that she's been so flirtatious. But to her father, she is meek. When he says, "Look to her more if thou hast eyes to see," when he repeats, "She has deceived her father and may thee," that final line is a reference point that we go back to and is used by Iago in Act 3, Scene 3. Brabantio is using rhyme there to stress his rage and frustration at his daughter's clear disdain for respecting nothing of what she should have been, her father. And then let's take Desdemona's testimony, the other side of this wedge. We learn of Desdemona through the contradictory depictions of her father and her husband. It is a great moment of high drama when she actually speaks her mind in this scene, because we've made so many judgments up till that point about her through others. Othello describes her as half the wooer and gives her flirtation. "She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her." That's pretty sassy stuff. She's pleading for him to hook her up. with a friend that's as awesome as him. Equally, when she says, "But here's my husband, and so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father." And it's once more making this rebellious act of marrying Othello seem almost logical in her eyes. She's like, "Well, Dad, you did this with Mum." Not quite in these terms, to be fair, but you did this. Why would it be different for me? And she doesn't just relent there. She doesn't stop. She says that I did love the more to live with him. She's signalling something quite feisty here about her desire to travel with Othello to Cyprus. And as a moth of peace, she implies she's this little weak creature. And we wonder if Shakespeare's setting up Desdemona as a naive fool or a really savvy spokeswoman. And we have to ask, what would Jacobeans think of this? I'm not sure they'd trust the judgment of a woman who claims to be a moth of peace, but is being so aggressive. So what are the major takeaways from Act 1, Scene 3? Well, we learn Othello is needed for business and to some extent is let off for his personal choices. We learn about Othello's life before becoming a general. We meet Desdemona and we get to put her love on trial as an audience. Brabantio fails to forgive his daughter and he lays a seed of doubt about her integrity that will haunt the marriage that she has to Othello. Ultimately, Iago shares yet more reasons for wanting to ruin Othello. He believes the rumours that say Othello slept with Emilia, and we know as we leave Venice and we head to Cyprus that the real tragedy begins from here. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?